Make an E in my class. I said, well, what did I do wrong? He said, you didn't do anything wrong, but you have a Cajun accent. You get a B. And because of that, a lot of people didn't let their children learn how to speak French because they knew that they were going to be looked down on later on in life, so they didn't let them speak French. My wife's parents could read, speak, and write in French. She can't speak French. They wouldn't let her learn it.
1916 to 1968, we were forbidden to speak the French language on the school grounds or in school. If they caught you, they'd make you write it 100 times, I will not speak it. If that didn't do, they'd put a little stick across your knuckles and make you pay attention. So that's all over with. In 1968, it was through with that. Now you can speak what you want. We don't speak English too good, but it's all right. You know? We don't care.
And I used to get on Mom all the time, why didn't you teach us to speak French? She said, well, when we went to school, the kids that didn't speak French, they used to make fun of us because they couldn't hardly speak English, you know.
Two of the little children that I taught spoke not a word of English when they came to school. They learned English in that first year and became A students. Can you imagine? Learning a language, learning to read, learning to write in 1 year.
On sait l'école, il fallait que j'apprenne comment causer l'anglais. Et ça m'a pris tout l'année pour commencer à causer l'anglais. When I was in school, the first year I went, I had to go the whole year just to learn how to talk English. And it took me a year to learn that. Then after that, I caught on and everything went fine.
The second thing that came along was the discovery of oil in Louisiana, just east of here out in the prairies where the first oil well was drilled, because that also brought in a lot of Americans into the oil industry who began to settle in this area. It offered a way for Cajuns to make a lot of money real fast working in the oil field, so there was a great economic benefit, but many of the Cajuns left the farms, left their traditional lifestyles, and they went to work for oil companies. They had to learn how to speak English, they had to adapt to the new 20th century lifestyle, and that radically changed the whole culture as well.
Now, of course, for Morgan City, as we see the offshore, that was a new industry because it wasn't done anywhere else in the world. So you were taking a lot of land-based guys and now trying to teach everybody the offshore way of doing things. So the early days of the offshore, there's a lot of people from South Louisiana, mainly Morgan City at the time, that got involved in changing from the fishing industry, the trapping, and of course coming out of Franklin and the agricultural side, coming from farming, to change into the new oil and gas industry. And it's been continuing that way since '47. And especially the fishing industry. It's a very closely tied industry where you see families that are involved in both the fishing and the oil and gas industry on the marine side.
I had a job that I could trap and work. I was loading up oil barges at the Bi-Sally Bridge, and then my company would, like, they'd give me 3 or 4 weeks off to set my traps out and run them and everything else, and then that's how I made my living for 30 years.
And I was working offshore on the boats. But when I come home on my days off, I still had to go back to fishing to buy groceries. And I worked about 11 months, I guess, and I took a leave of absence on the boat, and the people over there didn't want me to leave, but I told them I was going back fishing. And I went fishing and just kept on and off. In the wintertime, I'd go in the oil field, and in the summertime, when shrimping started, we started crabbing first. We built this house with crab money.
So with that, when you look at those early days, a lot of the workers for here in the industry were from here. You had a handful coming in to get it started that had, coming in from Oklahoma, Texas, and bringing their expertise. But it was very quickly picked up on by the locals. And now when you look at the early days of the offshore oil and gas, when you went international, you had somebody from Louisiana on every international location. And I think, especially on the marine side on the boats, many of the boats run in the North Sea and off of Africa were all done with Louisiana crews and still are today. Your largest boat company in the world has been Tidewater, which is home-based Morgan City. That's where it was started and still has a major operation, and those boats go international. So you have a Cajun culture around the world today because of the offshore oil and gas industry.
And then the third thing, and probably one that's sometimes underestimated, was World War II. In World War II, many Acadians, many Cajuns who had never been outside Louisiana were drafted into the war. They went off to Europe, they went off to North Africa, and they discovered that the world was really a big place. It had a funny influence because when they came back changed. They had seen things that their families and other people had never seen. They had discovered things, but they also discovered one very important thing. The fact that they spoke French became a real benefit. Pat Meir has made a film called Mon Cher Camarade, which is a documentary about the veterans in World War II and how they were recruited by the U.S. military to serve as interpreters because they spoke French. And suddenly this language that had been denigrated and put down for so long was very valuable. They could be in France, they could be in North Africa where French was spoken, and they were called upon to serve as interpreters. So when they came back, they had in the late 40s and early 50s, they had a whole different mentality and a whole different change to what their language and what their culture meant. They had experienced things outside, but there was still that strong belief that their culture was valuable, and it would take another 10 or 20 years until this really took root, and we created what was called La Renaissance, the rebirth of Cajun French and culture.
About 25,000 Cajuns served in World War II, and they would have been spread out throughout the U.S., throughout Europe, throughout Asia, the Pacific, and elsewhere. So you had more Cajuns spread out around the world than you had Acadians spread out during the expulsion that began in 1755. Then, except for those who were killed in combat, they came back to Louisiana a changed people. They had seen a lot of the world. They saw how people lived elsewhere. Many of them spoke much better English than when they left. Some left speaking no English at all and came back and had a hard time adjusting to speaking French again. They also felt for the first time that they were real Americans. I hear from a lot of older Cajuns that when they were young, they thought of themselves as Le Français and everybody else as Les Américains. Now they thought of themselves as Americans too. And they were very proud of their wartime service.
You had people living on farms, and they were living in extended families. And that was common to Cajun society, where you'd have not only the father and mother, but the grandparents too. And you'd have the father's brothers or the mother's brothers living very close. And all of the young kids would grow up, get married, and live in the same place. And one reason for that is because they needed labor, because farming is labor intensive. And in those days it was mules and it was manpower in the field. The more bigger family you have, the more successful you can be as a farmer. Well, when the tractor came out and you could replace a mule with a 12-row equipment, that there was no need for labor. So people had to leave. They had to leave the farm because there was no work there for them.
Although many Cajuns left farming due to modernization, many continued to work on the farm. Embracing new technology, farming would not only include machinery, but also science. Choosing more hardy, higher-yielding plants became part of successful farming. Perhaps the most noticeable crop to South Louisiana is sugarcane, with its towering stalks lining the horizon each year. Sugarcane is a $2 billion a year industry in South Louisiana. During the late 19th and early 20th centuries, sugarcane plantations lined the waterways of South Louisiana. The cane was planted and harvested by hand. Horses and mules tilled the land, and in the fall, the crops were harvested by cutting each stalk with cane knives. This was a labor-intense process requiring hundreds of workers. With the invention of the tractor and other cane equipment, fewer workers were needed. This led to fewer farmers. However, those that could afford to modernize increased in size, as machinery could now harvest more crops in a reasonable time. Today, single-row harvesters cut the cane at the base of the stalk, strip the leaves, chop the cane into 6-inch pieces called billets, and then deposits the cane into a transporter following alongside. The cane is then carefully gathered and dumped into wagons, which are transported by both 18-wheeler and tractor to the mill, where it is weighed per load. Each truckload must be sampled. A core sample is extracted from the load, squeezed to extract sugar, and measure the quality and sweetness of the cane. This test determines the value of each truckload of cane. The cane is then loaded onto the mill table, which transports the cane up a conveyor belt into the mill. The cane is then ground, squeezed, rinsed, squeezed again, and then the juices are cooked. This mechanized process quickly converts the juice into several products. The pulp of the cane, known as bagasse, is used for fueling the plant as well as other products. The finished product, raw brown sugar, is then transported into a storage facility where it is gathered and piled for transportation by barge, train, and truck to a facility which bags and distributes the final product.
My dad was a trapper, and the earliest I can remember about trapping was when I was 5 years old. And he trapped at a place called Blue Hammock. That's in Terrebonne Parish. And it was, I mean, it comes in my mind, comes and goes, and too much. And then he quit trapping until I was 13 years old. And then he went, because he was a shrimper, and then he went back, and when I was 13, and he trapped one more year, and then that's when I really got into the trapping part, because my dad would show me, my mother would show me, and how to trap, how to set a trap, what to do after you caught the animals. And
well, when I was young, about maybe 9 or 10, well, I used to trap with my daddy and my uncle, and we just go down the bar and look for trails for neutrals, otters, and minks. Put the trap in and go back the next morning, check them every day. And come back and we'd take and skin them out and pelt them and then stretch them, hang them, and about once a month the fur man would come by and he'd buy our goods. And back then they were really worth a lot more than they are today. Gas was a lot cheaper. And everything was a lot cheaper, but it was worth more money, and it was just a good living.
when I was in school, in middle school, I used to go run traps. Yeah. And you know where Plus Alive Supermarket and all that was all marshlands there. Golden Farms, that was marshland. That's where I used to trap. I used to get on my bicycle before school, go in and run the traps, and then leave the rats when I get home after school. I'd skin them and do whatever I had to do.
From December through around February was trapping season. We'd trap and do a little fishing on the side, and also after in February after that we'd start like fishing catfish, and we'd crab a little later around in May and June. We'd start doing a little crabbing until probably when it started cooling off, then we go right back into trapping again.
Now, we made more money in 1 month fishing alligators than we did the whole year of trapping. 3 months of trapping. And when I say years, I'm talking about like seasons, because, you know, when I was in Alaska, I tell guys, well, I could crab for so many years and crawfish for so many years and trap for so many. He said, man, how old are you, 100 years old? But it was seasons, you know, that I didn't specifically say that that's how it was, you know. So then my brother-in-law called me and asked me if I'd like to go take care of the land. I said, sure. So anyway, we moved down there, and my wife was a girl from Oklahoma who had never done anything like that. And we moved in a house that was over 100 years old. When you get a north wind blowing, you couldn't sleep because the windows rattled so much. And then you'd open a cabinet door under the sink, and it'd be snake skins and everything else in there. But she stuck with me.
We more or less made a living on wild game, which is almost an impossibility nowadays, because there's so many laws to where you can't just go and kill something when you need it to eat it.
We lived off the land. We ate and what I caught or killed. You know, deer meat, rabbits, duck, squirrel, fish, and all that kind of stuff. And then my neighbors were farmers, so I would give them fish, then they would bring us vegetables. I'd get up in the morning, there'd be tomatoes on the porch of corn or whatever, you know, and then we'd just kind of barter things, you know. And I would just bring them the fish, and I wasn't expecting anything back. And then they would be on the porch, and then And then she would go into town and like ground meat and all that kind of stuff. We had 6 kids. We was living off the land. And then she would go to the supermarket and buy this, 2-day-old ground meat. And then that's what we ate. In fact, on that By Sally Road, I would be the only one that's living right now. They all died, all the trappers, you know. Now, there was one that died. He was about, 2 years younger than I am. He died about 6-7 years ago with lung cancer. And then the older ones, like Mr. Nels Peterson and Dantes and the Brunets and all that, they've been gone. Terrios, they've been gone a long time. And but I mean, the good Lord had them die at the right time, because that's how they made their living, and it would have killed them that they couldn't do it, you know. So.
Mostly is the ability to go out and make a living off the land, which we lost that, and we enjoyed that. It was something that was really a great meaning for us, because it was an enjoyable life. And now that's gone, and I don't think it's ever going to come back. But the fact that the generation of children are getting away from that too, we can't bring any of that back. And it was a closer knit family than what it is now.
Despite the hardships Cajuns face, they have developed an appreciation for life, family, and the many blessings God has granted them. As a token of their appreciation, a series of festivals occur every year throughout Louisiana. To name a few, the Shrimp and Petroleum Festival in Morgan City hosts special galas with the famous Blessing of the Fleet, where shrimp boats pass by a Catholic priest and receive a blessing for a good shrimp season. During the 1960s, petroleum was added to the festival, and it's not uncommon to see workboats passing for the blessing as well. The highlight of the festival is the toasting of the King and Queen, which occurs in the middle of the Atchafalaya River, when the King's boat meets the Queen's and the toast occurs. The Harvest Moon Festival occurs in Franklin and hosts the annual Chili Cook-Off, where local cooks show off culinary skills. Lutcher hosts the annual Festival of Bonfires, where families build pyramids of logs that burn on Christmas Eve to help Santa find his way. But of course, the oldest and most famous festival is Mardi Gras. Cajuns celebrate Mardi Gras in many different ways, but the Cour de Mardi Gras, or Fat Tuesday Run, is one of the oldest festivals in Louisiana. In Jennings, a local group of gentlemen discuss the